Well, Danny Kruger, MP for East Wiltshire, welcome to the NatCon Australia podcast.
Thanks for having me.
No sweat. We were due to speak last week, but you had a very important announcement to make. For those who've been living under a rock or perhaps don't follow British politics as avidly as some, what exactly did you announce?
Yeah, so last Monday I moved party. I announced I was leaving the Conservative Party, which I've been a member of and an activist and an employee and for the last 5 years or so, a member of Parliament. I'm leaving the Conservatives and joining Reform UK, Nigel Farage's insurgent party, and so that was the big news for me last week.
And I mean, what ultimately prompted you to make that massive move, which must be both a massive personal and professional move?
Yeah, so I mean, you've got to put aside the personal to a degree, and I preface that by acknowledging, this is significant on a personal level. I've got very good friendships and great respect for many people in the Conservative Party that I've worked with over the years, including many of my supporters locally. So it's a big deal personally, but on the other hand, we're in this game to try and pursue what we think is the national interest and indeed the interests of our constituents. So I just looked at it in a quite clear-eyed way and said to myself, I don't believe the Conservative Party is going to recover to the point that it can challenge for power at the next election. We got absolutely pummeled in the general election here last year. We've gone down in the polls since then. We've had over a year to recover, and where in fact things are getting worse. There is a reason for that, which is that the Conservative Party is fatally split, doesn't know what it stands for. Given that, I said to myself, well, how do we save this country? We have a terrible Labour government, which is compounding all the problems that the Conservatives left and making them worse. Given this, what hope do we have of change? I don't want to hang around for another 10 years and hope that the Conservative Party sorts itself out while Labour take the UK even deeper into disaster. The good news is there is an alternative. That's what democracy produces. There's a massive gap in the market for a credible party on the right, but that appeals across the spectrum to people who want change, who recognise that there's something fundamentally broken about the British state and our economy and our society, and that successive mainstream parties haven't been able to fix those problems. In Reform, we have what I really want the Conservative Party to be, which is a robust party of the right that believes in all the things I believe in around national sovereignty, liberty, the family, strong communities, strong borders, and free markets, etc. And a leader who's proven himself over the years to have the character and the resilience and the vision. So it was a straightforward recognition that the country's best interest, those, if you are a Conservative, are now best fulfilled by the Reform Party, and the decision therefore made itself.
You said in your speech, in which you announced your defection to Reform, that the Conservative Party is over as a national party, over as the principal opposition to the left. The British Conservative Party is one of the oldest and arguably the most successful political party on earth. What's your explanation for why it has failed so terribly?
Yes, and I do want to stress, I said it's over as a national party and over as the vehicle of conservatism. I don't think it's over as an entity or dead, as some people have paraphrased what I said. I think the Conservative Party will continue. I think its best hope now is to be a sort of adjunct to Reform. And who knows what the future will be and how we'll sort things out down the line. But for now, I think it is over as what it has been for all these centuries, which is the principal governing party of this country and the challenger to the left whenever the left get in. What has happened? Well, I mean, I actually attribute everything to technology and for just the changes in our societies in our lifetime. So the most profound alteration in the economic basis of society from a post-industrial, an industrial model where work was essentially local and people could sustain a family on a single wage or on 2 part-time wages, to a model where even with both parents working full-time, they're not able to put food on the table. So there's been an essential deterioration in people's earning power. consequence on on globalization and technology, and then we've compounded that with migration, which has depressed wages further. So I think that's the kind of simplest explanation. On top of that, a whole bunch of cultural changes, which have been partly induced by technology and induced by the reaction to this economic change that's underway. And the Conservatives just have partly been responsible for these changes, and partly just been totally hopeless or helpless in the face of them. So we've got economic and cultural change, which has profoundly sort of discombobulated the people, and they are rightly angry at what is happening to their country. And they naturally enough blame the Conservatives. And it's a tragedy because no real Conservatives wanted to see the upending of our culture like this, through mass migration, through this aggressive progressivism, this kind of exaggerated hyper individualism and identity politics. It's a weird combination of ideas which has replaced the traditional basis of society, which is built around traditional understandings of family and community, nation, tradition, religion. We have a whole set of new ideas now that are very unconservative, but the Conservatives sort of made them happen. And either deliberately because they were trying to be with it, trying to show how modern they were, or they just connived in changes that were forced on them without putting up a fight. Reform has a very different attitude.
Yeah, it is striking, though, despite what you say about the background technological and other social changes, that the Conservative Party, not that long ago under Boris Johnson, did have a landslide victory, right? Where they famously went and won over red wall seats. So how much of the recent demise can be attributed to individual personalities, or is it much deeper structural issues that are at play?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to take the Marxist attitude on what drives history. Obviously, people make decisions, and we have to hold ministers responsible for what happened on their watch. Nevertheless, I don't really blame individuals. In fact, I honour Boris Johnson particularly for his great achievements in 2019, which was the year when we finally sort of kicked the door down to get out of the EU. And I worked for him then in government, and then I was elected as an MP in that landslide victory, which was such a great moment because it wasn't just about getting Brexit done, which was the kind of slogan. It was about moving beyond Brexit and thinking, how do we renew the United Kingdom? And you're right, he won support from across the country, traditional sort of shire constituencies like mine in the south of England, but also those industrial, post-industrial towns in the north. And the same message about national sovereignty and national renewal, a better economic basis, a culture, a state that respects the culture, the inherited culture of our country rather than a sort of alien culture. These are ideas that worked across the whole nation. And the tragedy was that we can blame Boris, obviously, because he was in charge, but unfortunately, he was overwhelmed by COVID, and I think didn't deliver on the promise of 2019, which, as I said, was to really grit the state and ensure that the government respected elected politicians and therefore the people. And then, of course, the great political disaster beyond COVID was our Australian points-based system. It's the Australians' fault, which was a big part of the election campaign in 2019. Well, it was a part of the big Brexit campaign, really. If we get out of the EU, we can set our own immigration system, a points-based system. We can basically take who we want, high-skilled, high-value migrants only. And in fact, the system that we introduced set the points so low that we've had a wave, millions and millions of people coming into this country from not from they're not kind of poaching the best Australians and Americans and Europeans, or Indians, or we're just, what we're doing is importing a huge unskilled labour force, which have competed for work with our own low skills population and put huge pressure on housing and public services, changed the culture or threatened to change the culture of many of our communities. And there has been a huge rebellion by Brexit voters, by people who back Boris. So it's a real betrayal there. And the result wasn't a huge endorsement for Keir Starmer. He didn't really win the election. The Conservatives lost it. The Labour vote didn't significantly rise. In fact, it went down in some places. It's just that the anti-Tory vote went in all sorts of directions, some to Labour, but a lot to Reform, to Nigel Farage's party, and to stay at home and to other places. So the Tory vote collapsed in a sort of just punishment for our failures in government.
Yeah, I sometimes think the UK and Australia, while they understand each other better than, say, ourselves and the Americans, or vice versa, often learn the wrong lessons from each other. And I did remember during that election campaign the way Boris Johnson was talking about the Australian-based point system as though it was the panacea, and thinking to myself, it's not quite as working out quite as well as you might think, because we've had record numbers of legal immigrants during that time, which have also considerably changed our capital cities and put pressure on property and all sorts of other traffic and everything.
I think the principle is the right one, that you should be selective. How you actually gauge that is a challenge, and something the Reform is wrestling with now. How do we reform the system to ensure that we do just get the workers we need, but including some low-paid workers for critical roles, critical industries where there's a labour shortage. But overall, we want to be training our own people for those kind of jobs. And the other thing we were inspired by Australia on is the illegal migration, and much more robust approach to people arriving in small boats and landing here and claiming asylum, which my understanding is you have tackled more successfully than we have so far.
We have, although we do have it's not quite as short as the Channel, so we have some inbuilt advantages there. But we have. Well, we stopped people coming by boat illegally. There's now a backlog of people who have overstayed their visas. So in broad terms, there actually is an illegal immigration problem, which is coming in through different means. One of the you'll be surprised by this maybe, but after our recent election loss, many senior Liberal Party leaders have said that what Australia needs to do is not become the nasty party, and harked back to a speech that Theresa May gave back in 2002. And what we need to do is become a more progressively liberal party in the mode of David Cameron. Is there anyone in Westminster who thinks that is the solution to win back power for the Conservatives?
Yes, there are. I mean, the Cameroons remain a force. I'm not sure David Cameron himself would put it in those terms, but there are people who do think that the future for the Conservative Party is not to try and ape reform to the right, but to occupy the sort of sensible centre. I'm not just the fact that there aren't any votes there. I mean, it's an honourable position if that's what your philosophy is, but I don't think many kind of conservative activists and politicians who actually compete, in front of the voters, think that. The fact is that politics has shifted significantly to the right over the last 10 years. The Labour Party are recognising that. Obviously, there's a sort of backwash, and there's the opportunity for people on the left to pick up support that's being vacated, as it were. And so there's a lot of there's quite a febrile situation on the left in our politics. A bunch of new parties arising. Jeremy Corbyn, of blessed memory, is back, trying to start a new left-wing party. The Greens are quite openly kind of Marxist in their philosophy. So there is there's a left-wing, there's a sort of left-wing populism mirroring the right-wing. The point is, the right-wing populism is the popular bit. There are much more votes on where we are now. So the Conservative Party is shifting over there. But just on the points about nastiness, I mean, of course, it's a kind of unfair and false sort of association that progressive or centrists make, which is to be on the right is to be nasty, and to be nice is to be in the centre. You can be nice and on the right, and actually be nasty and on the centre, as we find. And I do actually think there is value in civility and decency. I do. I mean, I'm sure it's the case in Australia too, which is that people think about tone and manner. These aren't irrelevances. The problem is when they become the only thing that people care about, and they're always trying to police your tone and ignoring the real issue. So I mean, I've been challenged on this a bit. You're joining the party that's really divisive and toxic.
Mm.
To which I say, no, the reason we have a divisive and quite toxic politics is because a set of issues have been serially ignored and exacerbated, in fact, by the governing party, by the people who are trying to be nice, who think that being nice is all that matters. So very politely, we've been led to the brink of national catastrophe, but everyone's, been minding their P's and Q's as we do it, and queuing up orderly in an orderly manner to go over the cliff. I'd like to be civil and decent, and I hope I'm courteous to my opponents. But the way to get the divisiveness and the toxicity out of our politics is to address the issues that give rise to division, which are mass migration, cultural disarray, economic stagnation, military, the hollowing out of our military, which exposes us to real dangers, inadequate policing. These things that, might appear rather vulgar to mention in polite society are actually the things that the public care about. And by me, people in polite society will care about them too once they come knocking, those issues. And they'll suddenly care less about good manners and actually want a government that gets to grip with them. So that's you taking the wrong lessons from us, in the same way. I really would not advise people to think that the answer to the Liberals Party's problems is to tack into the centre and hope that people will reward them for being nice. I mean, be nice, but address the issues.
Yeah. I'm struck by how much the rhetoric has changed, even by from mainstream Conservative Party politicians in the last couple of years. We had, nice Liz Truss, former Prime Minister, albeit for a brief period of time in Australia, in Brisbane, over the weekend. And she's talking about radically tearing down the existing system, and issues like deportations and questions about what exactly it means to be English even are being openly discussed, I think, in the UK in a way that would not have happened a couple of years back. And I don't think are yet happening in Australia. You've already alluded to it, but what explains that?
Yeah, that's interesting that it hasn't. I mean, I think of your political debate as more sort of robust and sort of virile than ours, but that's interesting what you say. Yes, I mean, the fact is, I say positive shift to the right. What that means is that a whole bunch of things that were previously unacceptable to discuss, like Englishness, I guess, and the word England, really passed the politicians' lips 10 years ago, and policy options like deportation are becoming acceptable topics. And I take issue with a sort of rhetoric of destruction. By the way, I think Liz's whole style, and in fact, part of the reason she came a cropper was that I think she went in a bit too studs up in her. Again, it does kind of come back to manners to a degree here. Yes, we need to be radical, and we need to have a very, very serious plan for government, which indeed Liz did. But I think we need to frame it properly. We need to frame it as it genuinely is in our case, which is about restoration, not revolution. We're not Leninists. We're not trying to clear the ground for some kind of new Jerusalem that we're going to create out of our own imaginations. We are actually trying to restore the proper basis of British government, which is about parliamentary sovereignty, the accountability of ministers to the people through Parliament, security of our borders, the rule of law, the respect for our traditions, the place of the family. These are old-fashioned ideas. I mean, the great glorious paradox in conservatism is that these old-fashioned ideas are perfectly fitted to the 21st century and to every age, to an age of tech. So I don't accept that we're nostalgic. We might be a bit romantic, but so we should be. Show me someone who isn't romantic, and I present you with a robot. So that's fine, but fundamentally, are we fitting the state for the future? Yes, we are. We're doing that through radical action, I hope. And Liz is probably absolutely right in her analysis of the problems with the civil service, which I'm very conscious of, and a big part of the work I'm going to be doing with reform, which is helping them to prepare for government, thinking about how we fix the machinery of the state. But all of this, I think there are, to your question, I mean, there are reforms coming. There are plans for change coming that are far more radical than anything that was conceived of by David Cameron or even Boris. The better comparison actually is probably with Tony Blair, who introduced a wholesale set of changes to the way the British state operates and the legal basis of citizenship, actually, to which I attribute many of our problems. And my point about restoration, a lot of what we've got to do is to go back and undo a lot of the Blair and Gordon Brown settlement, and as I say, restore the proper basis of government. But that is going to take some pretty significant action, because the whole, the establishment, the existing sort of apparatus of the state is now naturally enough very wedded to the status quo, and so there is going to have to be some force applied. But as I say, it's in the cause of restoration, not revolution.
I was struck at a recent Alliance for Responsible Citizenship gathering, which is this talkfest that started in London, about how the current leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, talked about how her party was the party of quote unquote classical liberalism and liberal values. That's how a lot of centre-right leaders talk, including those in Australia. But it got me thinking, what would Benjamin Disraeli have thought of someone making that statement? Because he was famously opposed to liberalism. That was the whole point of his debates with William Gladstone. Do you think mainstream politicians on the centre-right actually understand what Disraeli and Gladstone were arguing about?
Well, Dan, I mean, the word liberal is a complicated one, as evidenced by the fact that your party is called liberal, which was a bad word in our world. Listen, it's complicated. I mean, Kemi identifies as a classical liberal. I don't like that phrase. I think it's rather like saying they want I think we should root our civilization not in the classical era, but in the Christian era. Obviously, drew a lot of the sort of construction of the Western state owes a lot to the classical world, but fundamentally it's a Christian construction. And I think classical liberals, even whether they're referring to classical Greece and Rome or not, are more explicitly appealing to perhaps more recently to an Enlightenment worldview, in which from John Locke and later from Stuart Mill and others, in which the sovereign individual is the essential unit of our culture and of political philosophy. Whereas I think a conservative recognises the community as the essential unit, and how we break that down and define it and where it comes from is all interesting. But we think the individual emerged from the community. Liberals think community emerged from individuals, and so I do take issue with the way Kemi describes herself. But that's fine if she wants to be a liberal. I think that might help account for some of the problems she's got. I think conservatism is a richer tradition. I mean, but the word liberal, I mean, it's a contested one. I mean, yes, in the 19th century, it was the term applied to Manchester liberals, to sort of free marketeers only, pretty heartless lot in a lot of cases, whereas the Tories were more patrician, more sort of paternalistic. But going back another century, liberal was a perfectly decent word for Edmund Burke. But he, the great father of conservatism, he talked about a manly, moral, regulated liberty, not basically a license for selfishness, which I think is what liberalism really has become in our era. So I don't think we should lose the word liberal as a good word, but although it is a kind of useful shorthand for beating our enemies, I say progressive. I mean, I think that's the bad word, because it has a terrible idea that the future is always going to be better than the past, and the past is bad, and every generation is better, and we're allowed to throw away all of our inheritance and think up a new world ourselves, based on our weird understanding of what the future is going to look like. So I don't like word progressive, even though it obviously sounds nice, and we all do want everything to get better. And I actually am quite an optimist. I think things could get so much better. But only if we respect the past.
Yeah. I've always thought, though, that for a political party to endure, it must be tethered to some type of long-standing political tradition, like the Conservatives or the Liberals, however those terms may sort of have nuance over the years. It can't be just about one man or one woman leader. Is Reform a Conservative party? Or if not, what would you say is its governing philosophy for you? What holds holds all the members together.
Thanks. I think that's a really good challenge, and I totally agree with your framing. The party, which is why, on a personal level, it's hard to leave a party, because it's not just a set of random individuals, or just a sort of arid ideology. It's a group of people. I mean, Burke, who I mentioned, was the great sort of philosopher of party. He justified men, as it was just men in those days, combining in Parliament, which was regarded as rather treasonable. The thought was everyone should just use their own conscience independently. Anyway, I believe in parties, and I agree with you that it's about much more than the leader. To answer your question, I mean, Reform strapline under the word Reform UK is family, community, country, which I'm really pleased about. I mean, that actually reflects the exact framing that I've been using for some years now about what I believe in. It's the subtitle of my book that I wrote a few years ago. And I do think those sort of associations of identity and belonging, your family, your community, which can be your neighborhood, but also your wider sort of circle, but geographic community is important. And then your country, these are the proper objects of loyalty and affection. And I think that they're what make us as individuals. We are the products of our families, communities, and countries. And the purpose of politics, in my view, is to sustain these things, to make them stronger and more virtuous. People will become more virtuous if these things are strong. So that I think of as the philosophy of reform. And Nigel Farage himself, he comes from a more Thatcherite. I mean, he is a Thatcherite. He came of age in the Thatcher era. He spent the 80s hopping backwards and forwards to New York and London in the metals market. He's a real fan of what Margaret Thatcher did for the economy and the sort of national pride of the UK. But like a good, like a proper patriot and a conservative, he thinks that it's not all about the free market, as did, of course, Thatcher recognised that too. So I think he is the proper heir to the conservative tradition. But let me emphasise, it's not the Conservative Party. Reform is explicitly a challenger to left and right, and they are picking up support from across the spectrum. And there is, I think, a strong, actually, kind of left-wing appeal, actually, particularly to those towns left behind by deindustrialization, an appeal to solidarity and to community, and also to quite a strong anti-establishment spirit that doesn't like, frankly, people with my sort of accent bossing them around. There's that kind of pretty raw political energy that the left have often harnessed successfully. That the left have now abandoned because they've become such a sort of metropolitan London-focused party that has lost their roots in kind of working towns in the north and in the sort of the outer circle outside the M25, the London orbital. So I think that that's what's so exciting about what Nigel stands for. He can appeal across the spectrum, but philosophically, I think he would say he's a small C conservative, very, very much not a big C Conservative Party man.
Yeah, I always say the three things that distinguish the sort of legacy right from the new right are trade, immigration, and foreign policy. And we will handle those each in turn. I believe you live in a constituency, East Wiltshire, which is home to a significant number of military personnel, right?
Yeah.
The views in the military in Australia, at least, vary on their attitude to the so-called forever wars and the various military interventions that they've been called on to be involved in over the last 30 years. What's your sense of how the UK military have been put to use over the last 30 years?
I think you describe it well. I think the military in Britain and in my constituency feel an uncomfortable combination of pride and betrayal. Pride in the work that they did, which was in some cases absolutely heroic and transformative. There was really good work done in Afghanistan and in Iraq by British forces, and many heroic individual exploits, but also on a strategic level. But it's coupled with shame on behalf of the governments that sent them there, and not whether or not you agree that they were sent on a false prospectus into Iraq. And I mean, I supported the Iraq War when it happened back in '03. Um, uh, but I think towards the end of that decade, and then obviously into the 2010s, there was a recognition that strategically we were failing, uh, and then various other sort of international adventures, Libya, Syria, have confirmed the sense that the West in general and Britain in particular is just not very good at the business of liberal interventionism. So, and then more recently, and this is a sort of, in a sense, a parochial issue, and I don't know to what extent it's live for you in Australia, because I don't know what happened there. But after the fall of Kabul, the British government announced a program to fly into the UK Afghan nationals who supported our troops, either as soldiers or as interpreters and allies to the British Army. And that was something that, in principle, a lot of people, including me, were proud that we were doing. But the scale of it and the ineptitude of it and the abuse of that program and the cover-ups involved, and even now I'm struggling to understand exactly how many Afghans, and of course it's their families as well, have settled in my very military constituency. There's now a real anger. There's always anger at the Ministry of Defence. It's always the principal enemy of your average soldier, isn't it? But there is real anger now at the way that the military has been treated, and then finally, there's a terrible piece of work going on that will subject the British soldiers who fought in Northern Ireland to preserve peace there during the Troubles with the IRA, to expose them to prosecution by activist lawyers seeking to hound old soldiers for events that took place 30, even 50 years ago. So, and it's a strong sense that the government, particularly the Labour government, is not doing enough to protect our veterans. So, all in all, it's not a happy. I would not say morale is high in the British military community.
Yeah, interesting. Switching gears to then immigration. There was a recent march against mass immigration in London, organised, I believe, by Tommy Robinson. We don't have that exact type of personality in Australia, and I don't have any strong views on him one way or another. But we have recently had marches against mass immigration. And I believe in the UK, this was certainly the case in Australia, no member of any mainstream political party attended those marches. Why is that in the UK? It's a legitimate issue. Why shouldn't it be legitimised by having a mainstream political party representative attend?
Well, I mean, mainstream parties, or rather Reform particularly, but also politicians and other parties, obviously are very involved in debates around immigration and attend public meetings and protests on that. I think excuse me. I think the issue for that march is led by a figure who is not a mainstream political figure. I mean, Tommy Robinson is a very impressive operator, and he is picking up a lot of support for a very straightforward message, which resonates with a lot of decent people, which is that we want our country back and that migration is a threat, not just to our economy and to public services, but to our culture and, in fact, to us and to vulnerable people, women and children in our communities. He's saying something that is true and that people agree with, and that accounts for his support. The reason so many people are looking to him is because the mainstream parties until now have failed to address those questions or even to ask them in a straightforward and clear way. The good news is that Nigel Farage is doing so, and we announced this week a program, a policy to scrap the large-scale migration route that has been bringing so many millions of people into our country. It's called indefinite leave to remain. We are going to be much more robust about illegal migration, but it's natural that people want to, they want to demonstrate their genuine concern about the state of things, and Tommy Robinson is providing a means for them to do so. And it's different. I certainly don't want to argue against the people who go on his march. Obviously, there'll be some very unsavoury characters there, as there would in any protest. But those people are speaking for all of us, really, and saying we are very disturbed about the state of things. But I think it is important, going back to the point about how we present ourselves if we are genuinely trying to win power in a democracy. I don't think using violent rhetoric or associating with characters who are themselves pretty violent or violent in potential at least is appropriate. We need to demonstrate that we are a serious, respectable party that is going to, yes, address these issues. We are using moral force, not physical force, in the old-fashioned formulation, and I think you need to be careful who we associate with in that.
Got it. Understand. You've been very prominent in the campaign to prevent assisted suicide in the UK. What's the status of that legislation at the moment? And there were people, as I understand, across the political spectrum, including moderates in the Conservative Party, who came out against it, as well as those who were considered much more kind of traditional Tories who voted for it. What do you think it is that unites those who voted against it?
So the status is it's now in the House of Lords. It passed the House of Commons by a much reduced majority. So back in February, I think it passed the second reading, which is the sort of in principle stage of the legislation, with over 50, by the majority of over 50. It was down to 20 or so for the third reading. So sort of halved its support in the Commons, or halved its majority, which is quite significant. So it's just crept into the Lords. They are now doing their job of scrutinising it, and it'll be considered line by line there, and then either passed or rejected or amended. So it's more likely there'll be amendments which the Commons will then have to consider. I mean, at the moment it's on track to go into law. I'm still hopeful that the Lords will stop it, and I'm hopeful that if it does then pass, there'll still be opportunities for it just never to come into force. But I mean, just quickly, the problem with this bill, alongside the principle, which is so bad, but the bill itself is just leaves so much open to ministerial direction later after the bill. It's an enabling bill. It allows the government to introduce assisted dying with a whole bunch of aspects of it, the drug regime, all these kind of things left open. So actually implementation is going to be difficult. So I'm hopeful it will never happen, but it's a real danger, terrible danger. What united its opponents is a brilliant. It's a great question because I was so encouraged by it. Almost all Conservatives, I'm glad to say, and most Reform MPs opposed it, but we also had quite a lot of support on the left from partly Muslims, socially conservative Muslim MPs, partly traditionalist Catholic MPs, but then excitingly, I thought a bunch of basically far left, kind of the Marxist tendency, some proper lefties. The people who supported it and got the majority is this sort of terrible Blairite, secular progressives. The people who just think about what's the future. Oh, it's more liberal. It's let's give people more rights. That's the answer to everything. Now let's have the right to request assistance to commit suicide from the National Health Service. That's the great new cause for them. Without reference to the old Labour traditions of solidarity and care for the vulnerable, care for people excluded who don't have agency or voice. I mean, these terms that Labour used to use a lot suddenly are secondary to this, a bill to basically liberate middle class, people with high agency. Anyway, so I'm appalled at what's happened to the Labour Party, but I was encouraged by there was a fringe. It wasn't big enough to win, but it was significant of good old fashioned, what we might call the blue Labour tendency. People who actually care about social solidarity, not just individual license.
Yeah, no, I remember watching some of those speeches briefly and remember thinking that is an interesting turn of events. A couple of final questions, Danny, because I know you've got to go. You recently gave an excellent speech on Christianity in Britain, albeit to a somewhat empty chamber. Gladstone was a religious man. He was big on moral rhetoric, and the criticism from Disraeli that he was more concerned about abstract ideas rather than the quote-unquote material conditions of the British people. Do you think there's a criticism that could be made of good people on the right, that there is a tendency to think that the solutions to our problems is to re-evangelize, to tell a different story, in the words of the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. We don't focus enough on concrete problems like mass immigration and deindustrialization that have destroyed communities, and the role of technology that have made living a moral life or holding families together much more difficult.
Yeah, thank you. Nice question. I mean, it's very cheeky of Disraeli to make that accusation. I mean, he was a few people less interested in the material condition of the people, and he was a arts romantic. And Gladstone was a boring, pen pusher who loved nothing more than thinking of constructing a budget. But it's valid that high flown religious rhetoric doesn't play well, and certainly it's not the job of politicians to evangelize. Really important to emphasize that. But we are concerned in the production of meaning in politics. We're not just here to regulate the coffee trade or whatever it is. And those sort of deeper moral concerns are political ultimately, or they should be. It should be the business of a democracy to help to regulate society according to some idea of what is good. And that's essentially a non-material idea or consideration. So, which is why I talk so much about family and community and nation, because these are the entities that create well-being for each of us, material as well as moral. And I think that if we work to strengthen those things, then we're not finger-wagging about people's private morality or their private lives at all. But if we make it easier for people to do what most people want to do, which is to form stable families, to live in a healthy community, to love their country, then we will find people behave better, and we can have a small state. So, I think those are appropriate considerations. And my speech about as I kind of said a bit earlier with you, the foundation of our society is Christian. And particularly England, which is has an amazing story of a Christian foundation by the kings of Wessex, which is my part of England, back in the 9th century, and in the institutions that we inherit from those days are the right ones for the future. It's just a shame they've been so badly sort of overlaid with a whole bunch of post-Enlightenment nonsense. But we and I think. I hope for a restoration of the West, Australia, United Kingdom, Europe, US, Canada. These Western societies, I still think, offer the best hope for the world, and we need to remember what's good about them in order for our own people to flourish. And that's what I'm about.
Yeah, I know. Look, I love the speech, and I'm with you on the need to reinvigorate the sort of moral purpose of the West. But I also sometimes think that particularly young people, I sometimes think when they're told, they need to form families and stuff, and they look around and think, well, it's much harder now because there's no obvious on-ramp to the housing market and everything else. That's really the point I'm making. It's sometimes comes across, I think, at least the reaction I'm getting is a little bit, that's easy for you to say, tough about
it. Totally couldn't agree more. Absolutely. So if there's one thing we can do to fix everything, it's to sort out housing. And more affordable family housing. I mean, wouldn't that would be totally transformative. And yes, so we obviously our condition, our concerns should be material.
Final two questions, Danny. I know you got to go. Yeah. What do you think will be the top 3 issues in the next UK election, and how could it all go wrong for reform?
I mean, off the top of my head, the top 3 issues are going to be migration, the economy, and security. Don't know quite what form the security challenge will take, but I'm very worried about on lots of fronts. The economy is in a dire state, and we know about immigration. What will go wrong for reform is if we don't plan properly, if we're not ready, because we're clearly winning the public argument in terms of the sort of headline principles. But we need to be ready, and we have fundamental moral duty now that we're so far ahead in the polls to demonstrate that we are preparing meaningfully for government, and so that when we arrive we have a plan and that everybody knows the plan as a mandate. Civil service, parliament, everybody understands what we're going to do. So, if we don't do that, we will come unstuck. But we are doing that.
Yeah. Well, Danny Kruger, thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate it. A very thoughtful contributor, respected across the spectrum over there, and look forward to keeping in touch so that the UK and Australia don't learn the wrong mistakes from each other going
That's right.
forward.
Brilliant.
Really
All right.
appreciate it. Cheers.
My great
Bye.
pleasure. Bye-bye.